speaker today is a book author, a podcast host, a speaker who's pioneering a lot of techniques for companies for a number of years. He's a product management expert who has been training other product managers and product owners for over 15 years. So we would definitely have a lot to learn today. And we have Roman with us to talk about to us about product roadmaps in Scrum. Roman, take it away.
Yes, thank you for the warm welcome, and lovely to be with you. Sorry, let me share my screen with you. So hopefully you can all see a title slide that says Product Roadmaps in Scrum. That's the topic of my talk today. So product roadmaps are an important tool for product people, for product managers, product owners, anybody who looks after a product, manages a product, wants to proactively steer, guide, and plan a product. But obviously in a Scrum context, there is no product roadmap. Well, I'm saying in a Scrum context, and what I meant is the Scrum framework, at least as it's defined in the Scrum guide. So I'm sure as many of you know, there's a product backlog. There's now a product goal. There's a product owner, there's a product increment, but there is no product roadmap. So does the product roadmap fit into a Scrum context? Can it be used successfully together with the other Scrum artifacts? And that's sort of the question I'd like to explore with you. And in order to do that, there are two things that I'd like to do. The first thing is to make sure we have a shared understanding of what a product roadmap is, and then talk about the qualities that help us ensure that roadmaps can be successfully used in Scrum if we choose to do so. So I don't know how this is for you, but looking out of the window here, I'm based in the United Kingdom, in England, not too far away from London, so in the southeast. And looking at the window outside, it's a grey day. I think there's rain forecasted. It isn't particularly cold, but it's one of those autumn days where I start thinking about the summer holiday again. And I just recently talked to my wife, and we said, we really have to figure out where we want to spend our next family summer holiday, where we'd like to go. Now, a destination we went to this summer, we were fortunate enough to be able to travel here to a place called Tegernsee, that's in the Bavarian Alps in southern Germany. And so if we chose to go there again, then, it's a fairly long journey. And, I would then go and think about the options to get to this holiday destination. And, what I would typically do is use a roadmap, be it a paper-based roadmap, if I can still find one at home, or use a mapping tool like, for instance, Apple Maps or Google Maps or another one. So you can see I'm based near London, and you can see the destination is, as I said, in the Bavarian Alps, so right at the south of Germany. And here from England, it's a fairly long journey. Apple Maps says it's over 13 hours driving time. And so assuming that we want to drive, assuming that we want to go on a road trip, I think about the options that we have. And the first option would be, should we take the shuttle, the train to get from the UK to France? So should we take the ferry? Should we take the boat? And then should we stop somewhere over, possibly overnight? And if we don't stop overnight, would it still be valuable to think about, some breaks and kind of pre-plan them a little bit? And depending on the car we drive, if it's an electric vehicle or a petrol-powered car, where would we have to recharge or refill? So also something to consider. And experience tells me that blindly trusting the satellite navigation system while I'm on the road is usually not a good idea, but a little bit of anticipation, a little bit of planning tends to be helpful. Of course, it might turn out that the plan was unrealistic, was wrong, that there's more traffic and we get stuck in a traffic jam, or there's possibly even an accident, or that actually the journey is much smoother than anticipated and we make faster progress than we thought. So, but still, it allows me to think through the options and make some high-level strategic decisions. And just like I'd, use a roadmap to map out, to plan out a road trip, I find the same thing very useful for digital products, products in general. So what is a product roadmap then in a product management context? I would say it's an actionable strategic plan that communicates, that shows how the product is likely to evolve over the coming months. Now, a time frame that I like to suggest as a rule of thumb is 12 months. Sometimes 12 months is too long. Sometimes it's not long enough. So if you can't see any further than, say, the next 2 to 3 months, then it's probably not worthwhile trying to come up with a product roadmap. So for me, a product roadmap kind of makes sense once you can see beyond 3, 4 months. So, and you can cover the next 6 months at least, maybe 9 months, maybe 12 months. And if you have hardware, plastics involved in your product, so if it's not a purely digital product, you may have to extend the time frame to 18 or 24 months. Now, it typically covers several major releases or product versions. So a major release or product version being a new, version of your product that typically makes a difference to the users. And finally, there are different types of roadmaps, as you may know, technology roadmaps, for instance, internal and external product roadmaps. And I'd like to focus on internal product roadmaps. And these internal product roadmaps really act as internal plans that help steer and guide everyone involved in the development effort. So roadmaps, can be a useful tool. They can offer a number of benefits, but they also have some drawbacks. And I thought I'll share some of those benefits and drawbacks with you. So one of the reasons that I like using product roadmaps is that they offer, excuse me, my voice is going. And this is only the morning here in the UK. See if a sip of water helps. So they provide a continuity of purpose beyond the next product goal. So I'll talk about product goals a little bit shortly. They're a new element of the Scrum framework. But I find it really, generally I find it very helpful to work with product goals. But I also find it helpful to think ahead a little bit and not only focus on the very next product goal, but think what other product goals might be coming up. So continuity of purpose. Being able to describe the specific benefits or outcomes the product provides over the next 12 months and roundabout, as I mentioned earlier. And that's connected to that continuity of purpose, to see how the product is likely to evolve, to describe the journey that you'd like to take your product on. Again, for me, that's a benefit, particularly in order to facilitate stakeholder alignment, show to the stakeholders where you want to take your product, how your product is likely to grow and develop. And if you secure sufficient buy-in to the roadmap, then you have a shared strategic product plan. And for me, that is something that is very valuable. If you play it right, if you set up the roadmap in the right way, then it can unburden and direct the product backlog and help you make the right tactical decisions, something I'd like to talk about a little bit more later. And finally, if you have to acquire a budget, if you have to acquire funding for your product, then that's also something a roadmap can help you with, because it allows you to express the specific benefits, the specific value that your product should create over the coming months. However, there are also some drawbacks. And traditionally, a product roadmap consists mainly of features. In fact, traditionally, product roadmaps are usually a list of features mapped onto a timeline. And that can create a feature focus. It can lead to a feature factory mindset where all that matters is pushing out more functionality. And we don't really worry about if this is realistic. We don't really consider what the benefits are of offering more features or new features, enhanced features. We don't think about what is the problem that we want to solve. So I don't think that is great. The other thing that is a danger with product roadmaps, that they become essentially a plan to accommodate individual stakeholder requests. So, some kind of an anti-pattern of a good product roadmap, or a product road mapping anti-pattern would be to allow stakeholders to drive your roadmap, and you just basically facilitate, the process, the road mapping process, and let the stakeholders dictate what should go onto the product roadmap. And the problem with that is that it can lead to a product that has no longer a compelling value proposition. It's no longer clear why people should use it or pay for it. And it may have a horrible user experience. It might become a Frankenstein product. It looks horrible, feels horrible. It's like oh my God, what's this? And finally, particularly in an Agile context, as I'm sure you know, and particularly in Scrum, teams only commit for a single sprint. And so some teams are uncomfortable having now this longer term plan and worry that it's seen as a commitment. For me, that's a piece of education that has to happen, towards management and the stakeholders, but it is a risk. So benefits and drawbacks, like with most things in life. Personally, I like using product roadmaps. However, I've mentioned that is one of the major drawbacks that traditionally feature-based roadmaps are used. And I would say, unfortunately, that's not only the case traditionally, but also today. So, a concern I often hear is that people say to me, aren't product roadmaps anti-agile? It should say anti-agile, not ant-agile. Apologies. Even so, I quite like ant-agile, right? We can think about ant-agile and be-agile and maybe some other agile creatures out there. I do think ants are quite agile, aren't they? I think so. At least they move in agile ways, it seems to me. And I think, one of the issues, or there is an issue, there's some friction and maybe, an element of conflict when we use certain types of product roadmaps and certain road mapping approaches in Scrum. And I recently, I think it was just yesterday, in fact, did a search on Google Images. And this is the first roadmap image that comes up. It's a very nicely visualized roadmap. I think, whoever created it's done a really lovely job. But when I look at this, then it seems to just talk about capabilities. It just seems to talk about features and functions. So, there's a single sign-on, there is a two-factor authentication, there's a Facebook integration, but it doesn't really talk about any benefits. It doesn't talk about any outcomes. It doesn't talk about any problems to be solved. So for me, this is an example. Even though it's a very nice roadmap, it's an example of a feature-based roadmap. And for me, feature-based roadmaps really aren't helpful in an Agile Scrum-based context. So the message that I'd like to give, the recommendation that I'd like to give to you, consider using product roadmaps, but please do not use feature-based roadmaps. If you want to use roadmaps in an Agile Scrum-based context, use different types of roadmaps and use a different road mapping approach. Now, if feature-based roadmaps aren't the ones to use, which ones should we then use? And so for me, I like to suggest using goal-oriented or outcome-based roadmaps, using a collaborative road mapping approach, connecting your roadmap systematically to your product backlog, and regularly inspecting and adapting the roadmap. So 4 qualities for roadmaps in order to use them successfully in Scrum. Let me take you through each of those qualities and make those qualities maybe a little bit more concrete. Now, a goal-oriented roadmap comes in different shapes and sizes. This is one example of how you can create a goal-oriented roadmap. It's a roadmap template that I created a number of years ago. If you like this template, you can download it for free from our website. If you don't like it, that's cool as well. It's not about the template. It's not about persuading you to use a specific structure or format, but it's more about the underlying idea. And so a goal-oriented roadmap, as the name suggests, is based on a goal. It's the outcome that you'd like to achieve with your product, the specific benefit you'd like to offer. That might be around acquiring users. It might be around retaining users, increasing engagement, increasing conversion, increasing revenue, reducing cost, future-proofing the product by reducing technical debt. Those are all valuable or valid goals in my mind. But usually the goals come first when you create a goal-oriented or outcome-based roadmap. And by the way, I use those two terms, goal-oriented and outcome-based, interchangeably. For me, they're largely synonymous, at least here in this context. Some people just prefer, one term over the other. So choose whichever you like better. So yes, and I would usually first discover the right goals, and I'll share an example of a goal-oriented roadmap shortly once I've introduced this template to you. And then I'd ask myself, okay, which dates or timeframes are realistic? When can those goals be met, or when should they be met? And if dates and timeframes should be shown on product roadmaps has been fiercely debated in product management over a number of years now. Personally, my opinion is for internal product roadmaps that serve to guide the stakeholders and development teams, I find it very helpful to state a time frame or a date. But if you have a public and external product roadmap that you show to customers, then you may want to omit any dates and timeframes, not show them at all, or just use very coarse-grained ones, maybe next year or in the first half of next year, or use Jana Basto's now, next, later for timeframes. Yeah. But again, for internal product roadmaps, I think it's useful to balance goal and date and ask ourselves what is more important, to meet a specific date or fully meet a goal. Ideally, of course, we'd like to do both, but that's not always possible. What else do I like to put on my roadmaps? Metrics. These are success criteria to help me understand what it takes to meet the goal and measure if a goal has been met. So, if we set ourselves goals, then I think it is important that we're able to understand if we're making progress towards them or not. And then you can see there's still features here on this goal-oriented roadmap. However, these features depend on their respective goals. That means each feature on a goal-oriented outcome-based roadmap, if you choose to use any features at all, must serve a goal. So the goals come first, and from the goals, you essentially derive the features, which means you can't just put a feature on a roadmap. You have to find a goal that this feature supports and serves. And then secondly, I like to suggest that those features are really big and coarse-grained. Again, I'll show you an example in a minute. Way bigger than user stories, way bigger than epics. So no epics, no user stories on product roadmaps. And when I talk about features, by the way, I think about product capabilities. So big pieces of functionality. So no user stories, no epics on the product roadmap. You want to avoid, I would suggest, any overlap with the product backlog. You really want the product roadmap to be a higher level strategic plan, and then capture the product details in your product backlog. And then limit the number of features per goal to 3 to 5, with a preference on the smaller number. And then if meeting the goal results in a new major release, right, you can give it a name if you choose to do so. I really like some of the names that Android used a while back. Wasn't there a release called Marshmallow? Something along those lines. I thought that was pretty cool. Now, I mentioned a sample product roadmap. Here it is. So this is a made-up example from a healthy, and the context is healthy eating, offering a healthy eating digital product, healthy eating app. And this is a brand new app. And so, I thought about what might be specific benefits that I could offer with the product. And I thought, well, the first benefit might be to help the users understand their current eating habits and at the same time acquire an initial user base. So you can see that I use a compound goal here. It has a user and business facing part. And by the way, these goals here on the product roadmap, I view as product goals, right? So I don't really distinguish between roadmap goal and product goal. So for me, these are all product goals in the sense of a Scrum product goal. And then I thought as a next step, it might make sense to help the users improve their eating habits and then grow the user base at the same time. And then help the users get fitter and generate a revenue through in-app purchases or maybe a subscription model. And finally, help users meet their personal fitness targets and retain users. So you can see that I start with the goals and I try and find helpful goals that build on each other and essentially create a meaningful narrative, a logical progression here. And then I'd ask myself, what about some dates or timeframes? And you can see that I'm opted here for quarterly releases. And then I think about names. I think about features. And, talking about features here, there are only 2 features per goal. And these features are really big and they're really underspecified. So if you look at the first goal, help the users understand their eating habits and acquire an initial user base, the goal of the MVP, the minimum viable product, then it simply says healthy eating dashboard and integration with smartwatches and fitness devices. Now, it does not state which specific pieces of information will be shown. It does not state which specific smartwatches and fitness devices the app will integrate with. And that's done on purpose so that, the the details can be discovered as part of the Scrum-based iterative development process. And we can leverage feedback on early product increments, user feedback and stakeholder feedback on early product increments in order to make the right detailed product decisions. So it'd be a mistake to solutionize too much here and to specify the product and specify the details at an early stage. I mean, that basically means going back to a waterfall-based approach where we spec out our products months or years in advance. Why would we want to do this, particularly if this is a brand new product and if there's a significant amount of uncertainty and change present. And then finally, here are some metrics, or I should maybe say most of those items are placeholders for metrics. They have to be instantiated. The first one is probably okay, be in the top 15 diabetes apps 6 weeks after launch. And so for me, that product roadmap would probably be good enough to make a go or no-go decision and kick off now the development effort and move into the first sprint. Yeah. So an example of a goal-oriented, outcome-based roadmap. Now, as beneficial as goal-oriented, outcome-based roadmaps can be, I think the most beautiful roadmap is not truly valuable if the stakeholders and development team members don't understand it, don't support it, or have different interpretations of the pieces of information that you've captured on your plan. So I'm a big fan of getting the right people, bringing the right people together: the Scrum product owner, development team representatives, and key stakeholders. Key stakeholders are those stakeholders who you really need in order to progress your product. So for a commercial revenue generating product, that might be somebody from marketing, sales, support, or service. Yeah. And bringing people together in form of a collaborative workshop, a collaborative road mapping workshop, be it online or be it on site, and having the Scrum Master to facilitate. So the idea is that the Scrum product owner here is empowered to have the final say on strategic decisions, on road mapping decisions, if no agreement can be reached. And the Scrum Master facilitates the session, makes sure that everybody is heard and nobody dominates, because you don't want to make the mistake of allowing the most senior stakeholder to make the decisions. And you'd like to avoid the mistake, I would suggest, to use design by committee, where you essentially agree on the smallest common denominator and you make weak compromises. So this is about making the right decisions for your product, and at the same time generating as much support as possible. But it doesn't mean collaborative decision-making, collaborative road mapping, collaboration in general. I would argue doesn't mean that everybody's always super happy with every single decision. I think that's virtually impossible if you have a larger group of people and if you have a diverse group of people. We have a diverse group of people here, people with different backgrounds, different perspectives, different job roles, different knowledge, different expertise. So the point is not that that everybody's always super happy. The point is that you make the right decisions for your product if you're the product owner, and that you secure as much buy-in as possible. And that happens when you appreciate people's views and perspectives and concerns, even if you disagree with them, if you carefully listen, if you listen attentively, show that you value people's input, right? And then people are more likely to buy into and support the roadmap as if you create it, and then you go and try and convince people that this is an amazing plan and the right way forward. Now, in a Scrum context, I think it's important that we know how the product roadmap and the product backlog relate, and that we have a systematic way to connect those two artifacts. And here's our product roadmap. So as suggested before, describes the specific outcomes the product will create over the coming months. And we've got product goals on there, dates or timeframes, and maybe selected course grain features, maybe metrics, maybe names. Now here we have the product backlog, and traditionally the product backlog describes the outstanding work required to progress the product. So you might want to capture UI design in there and features, functionality that the product should offer, possibly in form of epics, user stories, workflow diagrams, journeys, sketches, mockups, non-functional requirements. Now, if this is our product roadmap, and here on the other side we have the product backlog, then the question is, how do we get from the roadmap to the backlog, and back from the backlog to the roadmap? And for me, the answer is fairly straightforward. I take the next product goal or the upcoming product goal, from the product roadmap and literally copy it into the product backlog. So if you haven't worked with product goals, then that's something I'd encourage you to do. I've been working with product goals for a number of years now. I find them really valuable to focus the development effort and have a kind of midterm goal. So I tend to recommend having product goals that kind of last somewhere between 6 weeks, 2 months, and 3 months. Particularly sort of 2 to 3 months seems to be a good time frame for product goals, and make sure that they describe an outcome, ideally a specific, ideally a measurable outcome. So very much like the product goals, the goals on the product roadmap. That's why I said earlier, the goals that I showed you on the sample roadmap are product goals in my mind. I treat them as product goals. So I just take the next roadmap goal, the next product goal, copy it into the product backlog, and thereby I connect the roadmap and the product backlog. And it helps me then determine the right product backlog items. And if you have some high-level features in your roadmap that belong to the appropriate product goal, you can just copy them across as well, and then start breaking them down into epics maybe, and think about, are there any additional features, any additional epics that you have to introduce in order to meet that product goal. So you now have not only connected your product backlog to your roadmap, you also have a goal-directed, focused product backlog, and that is something very valuable in my experience, particularly for as long as there is change and uncertainty, for as long as your product changes. Yeah. However, there's one more thing I'd like to say, and that is, if that's how you play things, for me, this is a very effective division of labor between the product roadmap as a strategic plan and the product backlog as a tactical plan. You shouldn't forget to keep the two plans in sync. So if there are bigger changes in your product backlog, then you have to be aware of them, and you have to take them into account, and that may lead to changes in your product roadmap. Now, talking about changes in the product roadmap, and that's the last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'm very much looking forward to your questions. The roadmap is a plan that is based on what we know at a given point in time. And as your product changes, as the market changes, as the competition changes, as technology changes, you have to inspect the roadmap and adapt it. Or as the product backlog changes, maybe the development progress is faster or slower than anticipated. Maybe you can't fully reach the goals in the desired timeframes as they're stated on the product roadmap. So I find it helpful to look at how stable is your product and how stable or dynamic is the market, in order to understand how often should you review, how often should you inspect and adapt the roadmap. Yeah. So we have, in a way, you could say, two inspect and adapt cycles. We've got a inspect and adapt cycle on the sprint level, where we inspect and adapt product increments, and that allows us then to inspect and adapt the product backlog. And then we have an inspect and adapt cycle on a more strategic level, where we inspect the product roadmap and change it. And so if there is a lot of change present, the product is changing, maybe it's new, and it's a dynamic market that you address, then maybe you want to review your roadmap on a monthly basis. Otherwise, I'd shoot for quarterly reviews. And if there's a lot of stability, you might get away with reviewing your roadmap every 6 months. If you're not quite sure, start with quarterly, 3-monthly reviews, and increase the cadence, increase the frequency if you feel that's not quite often enough. And if you feel, well, there's more stability, then consider extending it. So I hope that what I had to share was a little bit helpful for you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. If you'd like to learn more about product roadmaps and download some of the templates, or get in touch with me, please head over to my website. And I also wrote a book on product road mapping practices and product strategy, Strategize. And the new edition, the second edition, was just launched in September, and I'm pretty happy with it. I really made a big effort to update the book, revise the book, extend the book, add new material. So if you'd like to learn more about product roadmaps, particularly in an agile setting, then maybe check out this book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roman. Was definitely very useful and insightful talk. And we do have a whole 15 minutes for questions. Let me head over and see what our participants have submitted so far. Folks, please do head to the Q&A session to add your questions, and please head to menti.com to offer your feedback on this talk. Feedback is essential. Okay, the first question is quite a long one. Let me try to read it out for you. In product roadmaps, we focus a lot on what needs to be developed, but there is nothing about, for example, how product will be communicated, marketing activities, sales activities. For me, it doesn't look like we are displaying the whole product-related info and such information in such roadmaps, and big part of activities are still not transparent.
Oh, yes. Yeah, interesting question. Thank you for asking that question. So maybe it's helpful if I quickly try and go back, even though it may take a few seconds with an animated slide deck. So when you look at the pieces of information that I've suggested here on this specific roadmap template, then I don't think there's any development work that has been listed per se. You know, all I list is the benefits that you want to achieve, the outcomes, the dates or timeframes, and then some deliverables, some sample pieces of output. It doesn't talk about which technologies are required here to build this. It doesn't talk about any detailed pieces of functionality or any details of the user experience design, assuming it's an end user facing product. And as you rightly said, it doesn't talk about any marketing or sales related activities or any of the other activities that the stakeholders have to do. And in my mind, that's not the job of a product roadmap. In my mind, the product roadmap is a central strategic plan, or an important strategic plan that allows then the development teams to say, okay, in order to reach this product goal, this is the stuff, this is the work that we have to do. And then the development team representatives or the development team members go away with the Scrum product owner and stock the product backlog accordingly. And the product backlog is then the tool that drives development, directs the actual development work. And the marketeer and the sales rep, they say, okay, you know, we have an acquisition goal here, or we have a revenue goal here, or we have a engagement goal here. Therefore, this is the work that we have to do in order to contribute to this goal. Yeah. And to enable people to understand what work they'll have to do, that's, you know, why I've suggested that you use a collaborative road mapping approach, that you literally bring the right people together. So people understand, oh, you know, these, you know, people help you set the goals. You, as assuming you're the Scrum product owner. So if you're the Scrum product owner, then, you know, people, the stakeholders would help you set the right goals, select the right goals. You'd talk about those goals, and hopefully that'll make it clear to people, oh yeah, as the marketeer, I have to rework the marketing strategy. And oh yeah, actually I have to open up a new marketing channel here, or, oh, I'll have to adjust the marketing collateral, whatever it might be. Yeah. And then of course, how the marketeer, how the sales rep, how the support person, how they manage and track their work. Well, I mean, that's up to them. I mean, there are some agile techniques that might be helpful, like a Kanban board, but I think that goes beyond the scope of this workshop.
All right. Thank you, Roman. There's a follow-up question from the same participant. Andres, if you want to unmute yourself and clarify if there's any part of your question that has not been covered, feel free to do so. The follow-up question was, how product is communicated to market is not part of product strategy. So I guess the question is whether product communication to the market is part of product strategy or not.
Not the way I define product strategy. I mean, you know, ultimately you have to decide how you want to progress your products and how you want to manage your product, you know, and what do you include, which pieces of information you include in your roadmaps and in your product strategies. You know, I can only try and offer helpful advice based on, you know, working 20 years in product management. So, you know, have the courage to figure things out for yourself and experiment. And, you know, the templates that I've created, like the Go product roadmap, they're meant to be a starting point. I mean, they're licensed under Creative Commons agreement, so that you can take those templates and you can adjust and modify them to suit your needs. But for me, a product roadmap talks about, a product strategy should talk about who are the users and customers, what market segment, target group do we address. It should talk about the value proposition, the problem that the product should solve, or the benefit it should offer, the outcome, the user customer facing outcome it should create. It should talk about unique features, those aspects of the product that make it stand out in one way or the other, and it should talk about business goals. And again, I've suggested that in numerous articles and in my book, so maybe check out the details on my blog or in my book. Talking about the product strategy, I like to distinguish between the product strategy and the product roadmap. And it's important that you are clear on your strategy and that you're confident that you've chosen the right strategy before you create a product roadmap. So thank you for that question. That allows me to say a few words about strategy. Going back to the analogy that I tried to share with you at the beginning of my talk, the road trip. If it's not clear, or if I'm not confident that driving to the holiday destination is the right strategy, is the right approach, then it would be foolish, right, to start now booking a hotel or booking the ferry or the shuttle to get across from the UK to France. So the first thing really I need to make sure is that I have the right strategy in place, and I'm sure that it wouldn't be better to take the train to the holiday destination or fly or cycle, possibly.
All right, thank you very much. Andres, did we answer your question?
Yeah, hi, Agne, and yeah, I would like to say, first of all, thanks, Roman, for a great, valuable presentation and your insights. I still have one further question. If you could go back to your goal-oriented template, which was filled in the slides. Roman, can you do so?
Yeah, if you share your question with me.
Yep. So on this slide, so if we take a look at the first column, for example, which is the first quarter, and the outputs are, for example, healthy eating dashboard for the MVP release and integration with the smart watches and the fitness devices. And the metrics is to be in the top 15 diabetes apps 6 weeks after the launch. So the question is here, if we are having this release and the important metric for us is to be in the top 15, from my point of view, why I'm asking about the marketing activities and so on, that additional, as you mentioned, communication channel, for example, creation of additional communication channel, or some kind of other marketing activities on social media, the campaigns, we're launching campaign or something like that, because we need to support the product itself to get these metrics.
Sure. Yeah,
these are the
that's
same
understood
level
and agreed.
But I mean, those are the same level deliverables as dashboard.
Quite honestly, I'm not sure that it makes sense to have this conversation here as part of a presentation in the QA session of a presentation. Maybe it's something we should take offline. If you'd like to add marketing and sales activities to your product roadmaps, then it's cool. Great, do it. You can simply add new lines to this template. I mean, I've seen people who added a line to this template in order to track budget or have a target budget for each quarter, for instance. People have taken this template and modified it in various ways. Go ahead and experiment. It's not something that I would recommend for the reasons I've already given you, but if you want to do it, there's no reason why you shouldn't or can't do it. I mean, I can only talk about my experience and share my recommendations. If they're helpful to you, that's great. If they're not helpful, that's equally great.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you very much, Andres, for sharing your viewpoint, and thank you, Roman, for getting into a little bit more detail on what you have been shared. Just reiterating for us probably was also super helpful. I'll just give a few more seconds to see if anyone else submits additional questions. Just one question from myself. If I wanted to be better at phrasing the statements across all of those categories, what would you recommend I read or listen to? I don't know, maybe podcasts or books or something to build the skill on phrasing those things right? Is there something in particular that you would be recommending for those people going on that journey?
So I think generally, for those of you who are interested in product management, or maybe I should put it differently and say, for those of you who work as Scrum product owners or think about moving into the Scrum product owner role, it is very beneficial to acquire solid product management knowledge. And it's very beneficial to understand what is a product vision, what is a product strategy, what is a product roadmap, what different formats and strategizing and road mapping approaches exist, to know about things like product lifecycle management, which in my mind is related to making good strategic decisions, know a little bit about product discovery and validating strategic ideas, maybe learn a little bit about business modeling and financial forecasting. And I'm mentioning this because I find that particularly in a Scrum context, often people focus very much on product backlog related capabilities and product backlog related skills. And as important as it is to know how to stock a product backlog and prioritize a product backlog and manage and update a product backlog, it's not enough to maximize the value that a product creates, full stop. I said earlier that Scrum doesn't know a product roadmap, or Scrum doesn't know a business model. Scrum doesn't know a product strategy. The Scrum framework doesn't even recognize a vision, even though the traditional Scrum literature talks quite a bit about the vision for a product vision. And the reason is that Scrum is a very simple framework, and B, it's focused on developing a product. It's a framework to help teams develop complex products. It's not a product management framework. So for those of you who are product owners and product managers, really acquire those strategic skills and acquire the relevant product management skills. And how you can do this, I mean, the various resources available on product road mapping. People have written books on product roadmaps, including myself. There are various training courses available. There are lots of blogs and podcasts available. Have a look around. If you struggle to find something, well, you can always check out my website and check out my blog and my podcast. And there's a fair amount of information on product roadmaps available for free. Also a video that explains in more detail how I use the Go template that I showed you, if this specific template resonated with you. And as always, when you acquire new skills and new knowledge, there's an element of experimentation. There's an element of trying things out and see how they work for you, how the new knowledge, how you can apply the newly gained knowledge, how a specific template or road mapping approach works for your product, for your team, in your organization. But yeah, the message I wanted to give is, if you are in charge of a product, or if you manage a product, I recommend that you use a product roadmap. First message. Second message is use an outcome-based, goal-oriented roadmap, and involve the key stakeholders and development team members in creating and regularly reviewing and updating the roadmap. I think that is really key. And if that's what you do, then chances are that it'll be beneficial for you. And you just have to figure out what exactly you want to put on your roadmap and which information is valuable for you and which not. But again, with a little bit of trying out, a little bit of experimentation, you should be able to do that.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your thorough answer to the question. We are at time here, so I would like to thank you for your time, Roman. We are super happy to have you here with